So, what happens when a brand new nation wins a revolutionary war, but it can't actually pay its soldiers? Today, we're going to uncover the story of a forgotten promise, a massive pile of debt, and the surprising origins of America's very first social safety net. It's a question we still wrestle with all the time. But just imagine for a second. You're in a new country, right off the back of a huge war. For them, this wasn't just some philosophical question. It was a full-blown crisis. What exactly did the United States owe the very soldiers who had just won its freedom?
To us, it might seem totally obvious. Of course you support your veterans. But back in the 1790s, this wasn't seen as a simple matter of justice. It was a massive logistical and philosophical headache for a tiny federal government that was, just trying to figure out how to stand on its own 2 feet.
And the job of dealing with this huge problem, it fell to the new War Department. And get this, in a government that was built on the whole idea of limited power, this tiny office was actually the largest part of the entire federal bureaucracy. Its clerks weren't just managing armies, they were running the nation's very first social welfare program. Just think about that for a second. For a republic founded on limited government, one of its first major jobs was creating a national safety net. Kind of wild, right? Okay, so how did the system actually work for the people it was supposed to help? Well, let's zoom in and look at a specific case that landed right on the War Department's desk. What you're looking at here is a letter sent to the government way back in 1788. It's basically a plea for help for Mrs. Dickinson, the widow of a captain who'd served in the New Jersey line. This one piece of paper, it's like a time machine, giving us a direct window into just how desperate these families were. The letter makes this really powerful human argument. The writer's basically saying, look, her husband is gone. She just can't produce all the super detailed records the government is demanding. He's pleading for a little empathy, asking the government to just, consider their situation and maybe bend the rigid rules just a little bit. And this brings up another really important point. In almost every single case, we're talking more than 95% of them, women didn't write these letters themselves. To have even a prayer of succeeding, they had to find a man, usually a powerful man, to argue their case for them. So that brings us to the big mystery of this document. Who was this guy with enough influence and enough empathy to actually take up this widow's cause? Well, the answer connects this very personal ground-level problem to the absolute highest levels of the new nation. See, the author of this letter wasn't just some local guy with a good heart. He was, in fact, one of the nation's founding fathers. His name was Jonathan Dayton. Now, you might know the name from the city in Ohio, but his story is woven right into the fabric of America's founding. At just 26 years old, Dayton went to the Constitutional Convention in 1787. That made him the youngest person to put his signature on the United States Constitution. And this guy's resume was absolutely remarkable. He was a combat veteran, a captain in the Continental Army, who'd fought in major battles. After signing the Constitution, he became the Speaker of the House and a U.S. Senator. So here's the key. He wasn't just a politician. He was a veteran himself. He understood this whole system from both sides. Dayton's letter really shows us the human side of this pension system. But the government side, well, that was a whole lot more rigid, and it was defined by one major challenge: the burden of proof. The War Department's default setting for every single applicant was deep skepticism. They were absolutely terrified of fraud, of con artists and fakers trying to scam money from the Treasury by making up a service record or, exaggerating an injury. This is just so different from how we think today. We generally have a deep respect for military service. But back in the 1790s, if you were a veteran making a claim, you were often treated with suspicion first, not respect. So why were they so suspicious? You've got to remember what it was like back then. There's no photo ID, no national service database, no way to quickly send a message and check a story. A claim from someone hundreds of miles away was pretty much impossible to fact-check, which made the whole system a target for fraud. So the message from the federal government to every single veteran, every widow, every orphan was simple and totally unforgiving. Prove it. You had to show up with rock-solid, indisputable evidence to back up your claim. And right here, you can see the fundamental clash. On one side, you have this personal, empathetic plea from a guy like Jonathan Dayton. And on the other, the cold, hard reality that so many people faced. An official rejection letter, completely bogged down in bureaucracy and impossible legal standards. I mean, just take the case of a veteran named Samuel Hull. His claim was denied for what seemed like a bunch of tiny reasons. He only had one witness to his injury. The law said you needed two. He was missing paperwork from 3 freeholders, basically local landowners who could vouch for him, and he had no official proof he'd ever left the service. The standards were just incredibly, incredibly harsh. But even with all these massive challenges and this really skeptical attitude, this deeply flawed system actually laid the groundwork for something hugely important in American history.
This small, flawed, and, let's be honest, often frustrating pension system, run out of a tiny little office in the War Department, it was the nation's very first safety net. And it was the direct ancestor of the massive Department of Veterans Affairs that we have today.
You can draw a straight line. In 1789, the War Department starts handling these payments. Over the next century and a half, that responsibility just grows and grows and devolves until 1930, when the Veterans Administration is officially created to centralize and manage these exact same obligations. And this whole story really leaves us with a critical question, one that echoes all the way from the 1790s to right now. When a citizen has served their country, sometimes at a huge personal cost, what's the right balance? Where's the line between a government's need for proof and its duty to care for its people? How much should anyone have to prove?